Hello and welcome to another video review, and today I am reviewing the Winter's expansion for Resident Evil Village. More specifically, I'm going to be talking about the Shadows of Rose DLC. I will briefly talk about the two other parts of this package, which is you get a third-person mode made straight up. You can play the entirety of Resident Evil Village in third person. And then there is also an updated mercenary mode. So let's just get those two things out of the way, because those are the things I really don't have much to say about. Biggest thing I'll say, if you guys know on my channel, I was not the biggest fan of Resident Evil Village. I might have given that game a C. Maybe I gave it a D. I can't remember. I gave it a much lower rating, I think, than a lot of people did, simply because we've gotten to a point where new entries in the Resident Evil franchise just don't feel like Resident Evil anymore, and it's disappointing. And I think Village was probably a more prime example of that even than the previous game. With that being said, yes, they put a complete third-person mode into this game. You can play from the beginning to end in third person or first person. The thing that is cool about it is you can change that camera perspective at any time. It's not locked to your playthrough, so that's a pretty cool idea. I have no problems with that. But as I was excited to see that, when I jumped into it, I realized, like, I didn't care for Resident Evil Village that much, like, story-wise, so it doesn't fix any of those problems. It's just you're playing it from a camera perspective I'd rather have. So it's like getting part of what you want, but not the whole thing. So it's cool they did it, but I can't see myself playing through the game again in this mode. Then they have some updates to the Mercenaries mode. For me, I love Resident Evil Mercenaries mode, specifically Resident Evil 5 Mercs mode. I think is the greatest mercenary mode that they've ever done. 4 was good too, but 5 is really where it peaked. And they did have that mode in 6. It was okay, but it wasn't like 5. Here, again, they rely on first person. I don't like Resident Evil in first person, so that mode just doesn't work for me. It's too slow, it's too clunky, it just doesn't feel right. And adding more characters to it does nothing for me personally, so that's it. That's those two other parts of this DLC out of the way. Let's talk about the Shadows of Rose DLC, because that's the biggest part of this. And I'll say right off the bat, as I've told you guys, I wasn't a big fan of Village, and I'm not a huge fan of this. Now, again, the one thing that I did like here is that this is entirely done in third person, which is fantastic. Like, Resident Evil has always felt to me more natural in third person, whether it be tank controls or the over-the-shoulder camera style we all learned to love and adore with Resident Evil 4, and so on. So the fact that they're bringing that back after releasing two wildly successful remakes into the mainstream, brand new entry, leads me to believe that whenever we get to a Resident Evil 9, it is going to be fully third person again. I fully believe that at this point, because if you're making this DLC, that if you do all of the work to put that mode into the base game, it seems like they want to go back to that, and it makes sense. Resident Evil 7 was kind of an oddity because they wanted to make it fully VR compatible. For whatever reason, I think people thought that first person perspective was good, so they did it again for Village, and then they realized, like, no, actually these remakes have sold better than Village. I'm actually not 100% sure, but that's my feeling, is that the remakes have probably sold better than Village and 7. Again, not to shy anything at Village and 7, those games sold incredibly well. Like, Resident Evil is an incredibly healthy franchise right now. The third person perspective is one of the few and only things I really like about the Shadow of Rose DLC. Here, I'm going to talk about spoilers for Resident Evil Village, because you have to. This DLC takes place like 16, 17 years after the events of Village. You're playing as Ethan Winter's daughter, and right off the bat, the first thing you're doing is you are going into someone's memories to go back to environments from the base game of Resident Evil Village. None of this sounds like Resident Evil to me as a longtime fan. It just sounds like any other game. And that was the first problem I had, kind of like I did with Village. Like, none of this feels like Resident Evil to me anymore. 7 is the most egregious example I can give. Like, 7 plays more like a backwoods horror story that somebody said, hey, if we throw 2 rooms in at the end, we can make it a Resident Evil game. We'll throw Chris Redfield in there. Oh, it's a guy that doesn't even fucking look like Chris Redfield, but whatever, you know it's him. And I mean, then they had to redesign Chris to look like Resident Evil 5 Chris, but older in Village. You get my point. With this DLC, it's just weird because you basically play as Rose, and the whole point is she wants to get rid of her powers. She doesn't like the powers that she has. You have to remember that Ethan Winters possessed powers because he had the mold. I'm not going to try and butcher the name of this. It's like Mumicide or something. It's a bullshit made up thing. And she has powers because of that. So she's using these different powers throughout the DLC. As you pick up different vials and stuff, you get more and more leveled up until the very, very end when you fucking fight Mother Miranda again. And because that's who tricked you to go into this memory, because she just wants to do to you what she wanted to do to you at the end of Village. And then legitimately, like, when you beat this DLC, it plays the same fucking cutscene from the end of Resident Evil Village. And like the whole time I sat there and I was like, oh, well, maybe they're going to change like one thing at the end or something. It's the same fucking cutscene. It just it made no sense to me, like, at all. So, it just doesn't feel like Resident Evil. That's my biggest problem with it. This just feels like some other offshoot thing that's like so adjacent from what Resident Evil was, what it means to me and a lot of hardcore fans of Resident Evil, that I just found myself enjoying it less and less as I played it. There's different recycled environments. You go through Lady D's castle again. You go through, what is it, House Benevito? The creepy doll lady's house, but now it's run by, for some reason, I guess because it's Dream World or whatever, it's run by Evelyn from Resident Evil 7. They brought her back. And then the final area is kind of like the village area. It is what it is. So, and you fight Mother Miranda. The positive things I'll say are there is a sequence of events in House Benevito, and I know I'm probably butchering that name too, but whatever. You know what I'm talking about. Where the deformed baby thing that was really fucked up in Village was. They do another really cool sequence where there's a puzzle where you have mannequins that are following you, and you have to constantly turn around and look at them to get them to stop, or they will catch up and fucking kill you. Really cool puzzle, really creepy. That's like the one thing I picked out of the DLC. I'm like, man, if this was like anything else, if this was called anything else, I'd be having a fucking fantastic time. But it's called Resident Evil, and it's not Resident Evil. And that's my biggest problem with it. I can't get past that. And for fans of Village, for fans of Ethan Winters, the character, this DLC is supposed to quote-unquote wrap up his story. I feel like it just was more fluff. I don't feel like they wrapped up his story at all. I mean, at the end of it, you see the same motherfucking cutscene you saw at the end of Resident Evil Village, and that leads me to believe, like, what was the point of me playing this side story? I don't give a shit about the character of Rose. So what was the point of this? Like, and if they really truly want to do a clean cut from the character of Ethan Winters and all of this bullshit that they've created in the last 2 games, I'm all for it. I would love to see a Resident Evil 9 that's more of a return to roots for the franchise. Bring back a mansion, bring back a fan favorite character. Maybe not Chris because he's been overdone lately. Leon's kind of getting his due now in the Resident Evil 4 remake. Bring back Jill. I say it all the time. Bring back Jill is one of my favorite video game characters of all time. Or bring back a lesser known character. How about Sheva from Resident Evil 5? She's a great fucking character. Why don't you bring her back? You know, like, bring somebody back from the past for a new Resident Evil game instead of new character, crazy powers, supernatural powers that just don't make sense for Resident Evil. Do that. The DLC itself is about it took me 3 hours and 23 minutes, I think. I recorded way more footage. I pretty much recorded my entire playthrough for this video and then realized, like, this video is gonna be like 10 minutes long. So I don't know why I recorded all that footage, but it's just, the whole thing is kind of whatever. The other problem I have with it, one of my biggest problems is, like, again, you're in what I would consider a make-believe land, okay? So you are at one point, as you're kind of walking through this, you're guided by text. There's like these glowing words on walls that will appear that's like, hey, do this, hey, do that, and so on. And the problem I have with that throughout this entire thing is, at one point you're given a gun, right? So you have a what I call a make-believe gun, but you still got to find ammo for the gun. I had a hard time disconnecting from that because I'm like, okay, I'm using a make-believe gun. Why isn't the ammo just infinite because I'm in make-believe world here? I don't know. Stuff like that I had a problem with. Yeah, like Village DLC, I had to talk about it. I have to comment it on it. Resident Evil, as you guys know on the channel, like Halo and Resident Evil are like the two big franchises I'm always going to have something to say about. And that was the reason why I bought this DLC and played it, because I knew I would have something to say about it. And coming out on the other end of it, I'm just like, man, I didn't like Village, and I didn't really care for any of this. So if you're in the boat that I'm in, maybe you played Village, you didn't care for it, don't even bother with this DLC. Like, a third-person mode for Village isn't going to turn you back to the game. If you didn't like Mercs mode in first person, you're still not going to like it. And if you didn't care for the story with Ethan Winters and you don't care about his daughter, you're really fucking not going to care about that here. So for me, like, it's competently made. It looks great because it's on the Re-Engine, and we all know the Re-Engine is fucking fantastic, but everything else for it just falls flat. So for me, it's a C. That's what I'm giving it. I know some people are going to be like, well, you hated the game, so you're going to hate this. And like, that is true. Like, I did not care for Village, and I went into this knowing I'm probably not going to care for this, but I have to play it because I have to have something to say on it, because Resident Evil is one of my favorite franchises of all time. The original Resident Evil is my favorite game of all time, so I have something to always say about Resident Evil. So anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video review. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and as always, until next time.